Hello, 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 and welcome back to the game, a Pax8 show where we talk about the latest innovations and threats in cybersecurity. I'm Rob Barnes, and I'll be joined by Matt Lee and Dom Kirby, and special guest today, Joy Belinda Beland, as we dive into the government struggle with how to handle cybersecurity problems and what that means for the tech space. So be sure to like and follow and subscribe, and make sure you turn on those alert notifications. But without further ado, we are going to jump right into the news and notes with Matt and Dom.
All right. We're
Happy Friday.
we're here.
It's been a week.
We've got a little bit of a bug here. I'm hearing some audio back in my ear, but that's all right. We're here, Dom, and it's Friday, right?
We're here. Yeah, it is Friday. It's been a week, man. I don't know.
I'm looking into it
It's
right
tough. So, what do we got for news today? I saw some exciting ones as we were planning this out.
So I wanted to actually take today and go backwards a little bit and say, okay, I want to harken us back to an article from October of 2021. So can we pull up the article from the Department of Justice cyber fraud? So basically they came out in October and said, warning, very hefty fines. The DOJ launches cyber civil fraud initiative to pursue violations of cybersecurity requirements in government contracts. And essentially I wanted to bring this up, even though this was October of last year, because as we fast forward, we realize they've started doing it. Right, we've actually seen it with Aerojet, Rocketdyne, which we'll jump to, again here in a little bit. But also, we're starting to see it spread out and have wings around that. And so, what we're talking about here, and what we're going to focus on today as our kind of objective, is really that the government is struggling with the same challenge we all are. As the United States, and I'm going to be bringing on a special guest later today that feels very passionate about this. But as the United States, if our children, our grandchildren expect to have the same experience with technology that we do today, and the same experience with us being a leading nation that we are today, we're going to have to understand that we have to wrestle with this cybersecurity problem. So the challenge is when you're trying to legislate something that's so complex, it takes a little while for you to get legislation and things in place to actually make companies do the right thing through traditional capitalistic means. But what the DOJ came out and said was, hey, we're willing to simply just sue you over the False Claims Act. We're willing to just make it to where you now have a Department of Justice problem over just not meeting what you said you'd do in your contract. And it started with the 800-171 space, really, which is what our specialist that's coming in today kind of speaks towards. But Dom, what are your thoughts on seeing this kind of challenge being met by lawsuit methodology?
I mean, honestly, I think it's genius, right? Like people have gotten away with lying about this for too long. We're talking about industries where we have to implement that level of control and teeth to get anything done, right? So I'm honestly not mad about it. I know a lot of people are, but it sort of is what it is, right? And if we kind of move forward through the news here, and your examples of it spreading wings is seeing it applied to HIPAA. Right? I think everyone knows what HIPAA is, and if you don't know what HIPAA is, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Unlike what Matt said last week.
This time we got it right. I failed
right.
last week, so thanks, Dom, for bringing up my point failure. I appreciate you, but come on, then.
And it's about health data, right? We all know what health data is. If you see a therapist, they're taking notes about you. You see a doctor, they're taking notes about you. It's all your health insurance information. It's all that, and there were never any teeth behind the enforcement of this. Right, so we're seeing the DOJ use the same False Claims Act to say, hey, you said you were HIPAA compliant, you said you're all good, and you're not, right? So this news article from Compliancy Group really lays that out. And again, in my opinion, it's about time, right? These laws need enforced, these regulations need enforced because they're critical, right? We're either talking about national security or the privacy of your health data, which, a lot of people forget includes your social security number and all your health insurance information and everying I need to impersonate you as a human.
Right?
Right. Like, your mental health status, right? Like big, juicy data. So I'm honestly happy to see this. I'm really happy to see the sort of force put behind enforcement of these regulations.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where it's the fastest sword to wield. Right?
Right.
Suing over an existing, False Claims Act infrastructure that's already in place. It has legislative support. It has judiciary support. It has the things necessary to wield that. And I just think it's interesting that if you think about how long a case takes, even to get to a settlement, how long the legal wrangling, the appeals process on what's going to be included takes. This was announced in October. We're not even a year later, and we already have a full settlement with a company. And the interesting part that I want to remind people about is this also includes the ability to let Joy, my friend, call in about a company and then prove it to the feds, help with the case, and receive X percentage as a whistleblower, which means they don't even have to go find these. They don't even have to go create the evidence in normal means. They can gather that evidence from an internal human that has decided they've had enough. They've seen enough lies. They've seen enough of the same abject executive failure that exists in that space. And if you imagine that shifting into, as the compliancy group has kind of suggested, into actually like suing people over health information breaches, where would you go even to find that if you were the DOJ, Dom? You got any idea? You have an article you'd like to share about that? I think we've got something queued up.
Oh, we got the healthcare breaches on the rise, right? But I think let's harken back to the classic wall of shame, which is on the HHS.gov website. Sorry, Rob, I'm pushing you all over the place. This has been around forever, right? And it's a public listing of such and such HIPAA entity, whether it's a CE or a covered entity or business associate. So if you're an MSP, you're a business associate, to put that in context. Everything they've ever done to people is on this list, and it's publicly available. Like, just Google HHS Wall of Shame, it's there. So I think that's huge. It's a reputational hit, but I think more importantly, we're starting to see a trend of a rise in cases, right? And I think it'll speak to the whistleblower the whistleblower initiative more, because I don't think, if I was an RN or whatever I am in the medical field, I don't want to be associated with a practice that leaked 100,000 patients' data. And we're seeing huge breaches. I think a certain HMO is on like their fifth. So we're seeing these massive breaches of a lot of humans' data all at once. And we're seeing it from things like, I left my laptop on a table and it wasn't encrypted. These aren't state actors doing super fancy ATP type attacks. It's literally somebody left a flash drive that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And that, for me, is why it needs enforcement, is they've never had teeth. People have gotten complacent.
Yeah, HIPAA was kind of teethless. I mean, not to make fun of HIPAA. I think they're, that cousin you still love. But the point is, like, it's always kind of been a situation where there was no impact. The doctors, I had practitioners tell me, I don't care. There's no impact to me. Right. And I think, to the point, we're now seeing threat actors actually talk about doxing my end mental health data as a way to force my practitioner to pay the ransom, right? Or to force the practitioner to be involved in reporting themselves. And so you get into this interesting space now where I think the DOJ has a motion already in play. You've got frustrated medical workers. I mean, you can imagine you're the technician that's looping together these different medical practices, and they won't invest in themselves. They won't invest in the technology. They won't fix the challenges. They won't lean in and shift left. They won't do those things that need to happen because they just don't believe there's any regulatory risk. I think you'll start seeing someone fail, and this is my conjecture, but I think you'll start seeing someone have a breach that is reportable, and then have someone prove that they always knew that they were not honoring the rules of HIPAA. And you start finding, as you get into these payments from federal government systems, that being the same mechanism as an 800-171 lawsuit for those same exact things, right? For high trust and for things like that. So I think that's what we're going to start seeing in the market. And if I was a person in the MSP space, my advocation would be to try to be defensible in the actions I chose, which leads you towards frameworks, which leads you towards doing things that say, I didn't just make this up, right? Mr. DOJ, Mrs. DOJ. I understood the things and the nature of what I needed to protect, and I did my best, and I still lost. That's a much different world than materially not even taking care of risk as it sits in front of your face. And that's a big difference. So, either way, long story short, I'd love to come back to the one that is already in place and is not so theoretical. Rob, can you bring us up to the Aerojet Rocketdyne article, that last article again? We've already seen this. This was $9 million settled out of court. The fine that would have been a percentage of all those defense industrial-based contracts would have been significantly more. And I won't pretend to be the expert on this because I actually have one with me as well, coming on air in a little bit. But the point is, someone made X percentage of that. I thought that number was 15. I think Joy thought it was 30 or said it was 30. But the point is, that's 30% of $9 million for me simply going, I don't like this employer anymore. I knew they were lying about their 800-171. I can prove it, and I'm already out of the door, and I have no risk to myself. you literally let the best attorneys in the world that don't usually lose, they just settle, right?
Right.
Go into
Right.
court and attack these people under the False Claims Act. And I think that'll play out hundreds of times more over the next 2 years, in my opinion. So one of the challenges is when you think about health, you can understand the things you said to your therapist you wouldn't want everyone to hear, right? You can understand if you're taking drugs for something you don't want people to know about, or you can understand that it's contextualized. You know, Joy, when we were talking to her about this, and we'll bring her on here in just a second, she was actually talking about how that's hard to contextualize when you're talking about a left stanchion, drop-down stanchion on an airplane wing that has no understandable value except for its part in the Cooey for defensible industrial base, right? Like, it doesn't have the same level of contextualization. So I feel like it's a strategy of both going after things the American public can understand and making it something that does have some tangibility, and also really continue to focus on the DIB in that way. So Rob, if you want to get us on to the next piece, and let's bring our special guest on. I'm excited about this. All right, Joy, we have Joy Belinda with us. I think you're live. If you want to say hello and introduce yourself real quick for us, please.
Well, hi, everyone. And Matt and Dom, thank you so much for having me. This is fun to join you, especially on a Friday. So I'm Joy Beland. I had my own managed service provider business for 21 years based out of Los Angeles. And a lot of folks in this industry know me back from those days. I began to really focus on cybersecurity in 2014. I was a little bit ahead of most of the MSPs in understanding what it meant for my client base and my employees to be facing things like ransomware with the skill set that we embodied as a normal MSP. So we went all in on cybersecurity, and I sold that practice in 2018. I was able to spend time with
really early. Right, Joy?
did.
Like, I mean, 2018 was when I was just starting to open my eyes to the understanding of how much around me I didn't understand from a risk perspective, right? Like, that's, you know, to put it in perspective. So you would have been significantly early in the SMB MSP space to be doing that before you sold your practice. So that's helpful to know. I didn't realize that.
One of my favorite stories to tell is when I had invited some, I have a posse of MSP peer owners in Los Angeles, and we would always go to the same events together.
Yeah.
We would be like, is the posse going to ride again? They're so much fun.
I can totally picture that, Joy.
They all came to my wedding recently. But I used to invite them to these enterprise level events that had like the FBI and the Secret Service cyber crimes presenting, and they'd be like, they actually, one of them started calling me Chicken Little, and they're like, the sky is not falling with this whole cybersecurity thing.
Yeah.
And, it's one of my most proud terms of affection that I've been given. Because I'd love to be a Chicken Little when it comes to cybersecurity. I was going to all of those events, and I'd sit down, I'd drive an hour and a half to meet one of these Secret Service cyber crimes guys on a break while he was doing a court case. And I'd walk him through my deck on security awareness training, which back then wasn't even called security awareness training.
Sure.
It was like,
it hadn't even been codified. It was just training. Yeah.
Yeah. Just trying to train my clients for their own benefit. And I was doing it for free. I was anybody that would listen to me, I was giving security training. So, so when I sold that practice, I went to work with Continuum. They were ingested by ConnectWise. I was doing those cyber boot camps, which is great fun. And then I was with Edwards Performance Solutions for the last couple of years. And in that role, I got really deep into CMMC. So I'm a provisional assessor and a provisional instructor. That means I met a lot of criteria.
And helped write a lot of the training on that as well, as I understand, during the earlier phases of the last 2 years. Yeah.
I led a team that developed the first certification course. That's the first of 2 certifications that you need to be an assessor. And my curricula was the first to be approved by the DoD. It's called the CCP class. And then I've been teaching it for about a year and a half. So I get to teach it with industry peers that are some amazing people. And if you're interested,
I've gotten to watch a lot of that real quick, Joy. On a side note, I got to watch a lot of the like superstars that, because you were so deep in a lot of the training side, you got people from the board, you got people from the decision-making space sitting there and help co-present. Like, how much more legitimization comes than actually presenting with the people on CMMCAB that are driving this, right? Like, I thought that was really neat watching from the back.
It has been. Yeah, thank you. It's been really heartening to see the investment of the community. And then, honestly, everything I learned about community in the MSP space has translated really well into the ecosystem where you have consultants, you have assessors, and then you have the
Yep.
organizations themselves that will need to be assessed. So I'm so grateful. I just joined Summit 7. I'm the Vice President of Partner Strategy and Cybersecurity Education with them. For those of you who know Jacob Horn, Jason
Jacob's a rock
Stroser,
star.
Scott Edwards,
Yeah.
it's an all-star lineup, and I'm really humbled to be working with them. So, and the False Claims Act to me is one of the most sexy things about cybersecurity that I have heard in a really long time. So,
Okay, I can't not bite on that, Joy. Please
Right?
elaborate.
Yeah.
Like just continue, dang it.
okay, so who here wouldn't be a fan of Jack Reisider and the Darknet Diaries, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It may seem like a
Yeah.
weird tie-in I'm making, but if you find episode 80 from December of 2020, he zeroes in, his whole story is about a whistleblower. And I was running, I'm a runner, and I was like 4 miles into a 10K when I heard this episode, and I stopped and I pulled out, I actually carry a pen and a notepad, and I started taking notes on this because it was so compelling. So the Department of Justice actually hires third-party firms to go out there and find whistleblowers. They will hear rumor of
Wow.
fraud that's happening, and not just in the defense industrial base, anywhere within a government agency supply chain. And they try to recruit someone that is a whistleblower utilizing skill sets that belong to former CIA agents, anybody that works in the
Recruiters in
intelligence
the same
community.
space, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And this is what got me just so extremely excited about. I have to know as much as I can. I've read all of the cases between Cisco Systems and the Aerojet. And I consult with an insider threat firm that is former intelligence. And so for me, all of this came together with CMMC. It's a very small part is learning
Yeah.
about the False Claims Act, but for me, it's one of the most compelling parts because, like you, as an MSP out there, I was trying to convince doctors and even
Yep.
organizations that had contracts with Rocketdyne to really put into place the requirements in their contracts.
Yep.
Or that the government compliance regulations were telling them that they needed to. And it was a constant struggle for them to do the right thing. They're receiving money under the pretense that they are meeting all of the cybersecurity criteria. But as long as there's no one's ever going to walk in the door and check, like when you were talking about HIPAA,
Right.
I had a doctor
Yep.
tell me in every circle, every professional association I know, I have never met anybody that's had HIPAA come in and scrutinize their environment. And
Yeah.
that's very hard to convince them to spend money on cybersecurity. You have to make it a different business impact case in that,
Yeah.
They're saving
And
for
we are
that new
kind of seeing
Maserati, Joy. Don't get in the way of that. Jeez.
Yeah. Well,
That's,
and
I
in
ran so
Beverly
many
Hills,
doctors
my
who drove
doctors were all
Maseratis.
plastic surgeons. Yeah, all of my clientele were plastic surgeons.
Right.
Well, and going back to the doctor side and comparing to 800-171, I had a 240,000 square foot facility that used to be on Learjet Building 9 in a certain city that we did support with. And they had these giant 5-axis machinos that would machine a truck, Joy, like essentially. And I sat down in their executive boardroom one time. We were talking about putting in MFA. We were talking about DMZ. We were talking about separating the machine networks. We're talking about doing some things that lend themselves towards the practices in 800-171. At the same time, they were still checking off to the main players, the Boeings, the Spirits, the Learjets, those players, and saying Northrop Grumman and saying we're 800-171 compliant. Check. This would have been circa 2017 or so, circa 2016. And the interesting part was they genuinely, when I stood up, Chicken Little Matt, because I had already taken the class from my wonderful friend Joy, and I'm saying, hey, this is a problem. You need to deal with it. You are lying. You're checking a box and you are lying. And they said, Matt, I understand that. How long can we get away with lying about it? Genuinely, they wanted me to conjecture on how long before the market conditions change. Now, the sad part is, in my heart, my answer was, you probably got 5 to 6 years in reality, because They're still not going to get with it. They're not going to change it. And in reality, that's what's played out. But now we're getting to where all those lies are all hunting grounds for False Claims Act, aren't they, Joy? I mean, even going back 4 or 5 years, there's still some degree of this ability for those to be whistleblown upon, if you will, right? I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And then we can pivot into some more conversations around CMMC as well.
Yeah, well, and the interesting thing to me, a couple of things about, going back is that the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative that came out has the DOJ very enabled to go after these people who are committing fraud. And by the by, the False Claims Act, was came to be, I think, during the Civil War. So since the late 1800s, this has been around, but it wasn't actually used for cybersecurity. All other kinds of fraud and malpractice is how it was leveraged, but not for cybersecurity until 2019. That's when they really got serious about it. And we have.
Do you know what the first case was, by chance, Joy?
For cybersecurity, I believe it was
the one in
Cisco.
19. Yeah. Was it Cisco?
Yeah,
okay, great.
Cisco.
Just curious. Thanks.
Yeah. So in both of these cases, they happened to have a whistleblower that was somebody in the IT or IS department who had repeatedly said, we are not in compliance. You're asking
hold on. I want to pause.
sign off.
Sorry, I want to repeat your point real quick. Somebody in the IT/IS department.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I just want to point that out. Like, it's an important point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because they were being asked to sign off as responsible for security that all of the compliance requirements had been met. And they were upset about it. They were being made, personally responsible. And so they started to get more and more vocal about it, more and more complaints.
And it's not even just they're upset about being responsible. We as IT people, and you know this as well, Joy, we love creating. We're passionate about making stuff that works, that enables business, that drives things forward. And then you're being driven down and making it less secure because they won't make the right choices. You've been telling them what they need to do, and you thought the framework was going to solve you, and it still didn't. And so I think there's a certain amount of like depression that comes from that as a practitioner, right?
Well, for me too, I feel like I have a level of professional ethics, especially when it comes to cyber, that's not going to let me carry on some sort of lie, right? I take a lot of pride in the solutions and the security methodology that I try to drive, preach, and implement. I'm not going to lie about it, right? I'm just not, right? It's for me personally, and for any of us personally as a professional, it's just, it feels really bad at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if there's anyone in the MSP industry that hasn't been asked to lie about something, whether it's licensing, whether it's hardware, it just happens. And some of it's outright and some of it is like, can you just do me this for right now? I promise we're going to get to it by next year, that kind of a thing. But in these two cases, it was egregious. It was flat out fraud. And, there is that integrity of, it's one thing to choose as a business decision that we're going to accept the risk or transfer the risk of something. It's another thing to receive money under fraudulent context. That's the thing. They were receiving money from these government contracts, billions of dollars. I think that the Marketjet or Aerojet Rocketdyne one that was settled this year, the original penalty that they were going after was $19 billion.
Yeah.
Billion.
Wow.
So, and that is them going back and saying, this is how many years you were receiving money for these contracts, and what the value of those contracts was that you did not deliver what you had promised.
Yep.
So it is.
And that's a really important point, because they could retro back, right, to when you started lying. You've been defrauding the government for, that's huge.
So
it's important.
There's
I want everyone to
treble
understand
damages.
that.
Yeah, treble damages is 3 times the amount of the contract itself. They also have specific penalties, I think between I want to say $7,000 and $12,000 per infraction. So for each of the 110 controls, for example, that you knowingly were not implementing the required security, you have a per infraction charge added on top of that.
Yep.
So the government can reclaim a lot of money. This is not just, I'm going to lose my contract, which that alone could end business for a lot of these organizations, just not having the contract. Right? But
And what you said, Joy, that was, quote unquote sexy about this is you can have headhunting organizations force multiplying how fast you could scale this across the orgs. If I simply said as a DOJ that I was going to focus on this as part of our cybercrime initiative, then you're saying, okay, let's hire 35 firms. Let's go ahead and get into these 7 different verticals. You could see this having a caseload that's fast enough that you would not see in judiciary any other way. And you would not see in a traditional legislative methodology and applying legislative controls in that way, right? But this has instant impact that is really much more focused on capitalism of, did you uphold what you said you were? Were you creating fraud by lying and saying you had these controls when you did not? And I think from an MSP's perspective, what's so neat about this, Joy, is these MSPs have created those proofs over the years so many times. How many times have I, as an MSP, when I knew somebody was turning down MFA, saying, hey, you have requirements under MFA, you need to be dealing with da-da-da-da-da-da. Like, those conversations are proof that they knew they were violating the controls in a lot of ways. And for the DOJ, I think there's going to be golden honeypots for those MSPs in a lot of ways. So, or for the case, at least, I apologize.
Well, it's also the DOJ, right? So it's
DOJ, sorry.
Organizations like the FBI sit under the DOJ. Right. So understand that if you're the MSP and they're suspicious about customer X, they're going to subpoena you next. They're going to get warrants for you next to understand what you were doing for them to try to help them get there, which is why we always harp on document suggestions you make, document rejection or acceptance of said suggestions, implementation, because it would not be hard for them to just go get a subpoena for all your stuff and you have to turn it over. Right. So it's
and it'll be interesting.
Collateral damage could be real here.
Go ahead, Joy.
It'll be interesting how this plays out in other government agencies. I can speak to CMMC. CMMC for the Defense Industrial Base through the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense is one of 14 government agencies that handles controlled unclassified information, shares it down through their supply chain. So Matt had said Cooey earlier. That's an acronym, CUI, for Controlled Unclassified Information. So this is not in regards to classified information.
Well done.
Oh, do I get a point?
You get a point.
You get a point.
That we didn't even get a point. We failed. We get negative points, and you get positive points. Dom and I are already walking out losing here to Joy. This is horrible.
Right.
It's all right. I still love
because
Joy.
I teach this stuff. I have to explain acronyms all the time, but and now I lost my train of thought. The 14 agencies. So the DoD is just one of 14 agencies that has to find a way to protect this controlled and classified information. So when you talk about the MSP and how you might be able to be subpoenaed, I can speak to how the Department of Defense is viewing an MSP right now and where that might translate. And the interesting thing is that we just had the CMMC assessment process document released a couple of weeks ago. The Department of Defense is viewing a managed service provider as an entity because they help serve as protection for that controlled unclassified information, potentially needing to be FedRAMP moderate, at a minimum to be CMMC level 2 themselves. That is in writing in a public document right now.
Yeah.
So we have a public comment period that we are actively trying to engage all stakeholders, MSPs being one of many, but MSPs really need to have a voice in this, because I know a lot of MSPs, Matt does too, and that have clients in the defense industrial base. And Matt, you tell me, how many of them do you think could pass a CMMC level 2 assessment by a third party? If Mark Menzies and his team went in there to assess them, what percent?
Right. Probably 20 would be my gut, 15. I think it'd be extremely low.
Extremely low, and we'd reduce that to like 1% if they had to be FedRAMP moderate.
Oh, it'd go to almost nothing.
That's the kicker. FedRAMP moderate.
That's a killer.
There's no way.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
So, but I think the point, if we distill this out, is Joyce saying, first off, go advocate and say, let's at least set a standard as CMMC. FedRAMP is going to be hard for a lot of reasons. Procedurally, time, expense, massively harder than the other space. But also, if you look at the way this is being viewed, it's 2 real critical points. Number one, you can't just sign away your risk and say, I'm not a part of it. You are part of their company and are due to be assessed as a result of being the protection edge of that, I think is what Joy's kind of saying we're seeing. But also we're starting to see kind of the precedents for trying to get more of a hold of this and bring them under standards that already exist, even if they're not well fit for serving that market, which has been kind of the challenges in my mind with CMMC over the last couple of years. They're creating an entire part of the capitalistic endeavor that hasn't existed, and it's a very tough thing to do. But sometimes if you do it wrong, it really hurts.
Like I was almost anticipating FedRAMP. I didn't think they would do it per se, but it came to mind because FedRAMP is very much centered around multi-tenant environments, right?
Yeah.
If you're an MSP, what do you have in your organization that has a lot of customers in it? Your RMM, right? It becomes a multi-tenant application in effect. So it's not surprising. I don't see, I could think of maybe 2 MSPs, and you can probably think of a couple more in Joy, but I can think of maybe 2 MSPs that I know that could even approach FedRAMP moderate.
Agreed.
It's wild.
And then you also have the tool set that MSPs use. I mean, the implications going through the supply chain are magnanimous. And it's a hard stop, honestly, for the CMMC assessment program to continue, because they can't walk in to assess any organization using an MSP now.
Right.
If they expect for their service provider themselves to have a level 2 certification. So now we've put a whole industry in front of those organizations that need to be assessed. And who's
the USs of the world, right? And some potential, right? You start looking at that footprint of the service provider to the service provider, the people that are right. So you have such an upchain potential impact. And I think that's probably an overstep with the FedRAMP piece, but I get why this is trying to be struggled with, right? And it's existing and applying things that already are in standard to do that. But I still think, though, from the MSP, because we like to try to keep this conversation focused on the MSP and or the SMB. If you were talking to the SMB, Joy, what would you say about kind of this whole landscape, not just the CMMC, but this whole landscape? What would you advocate they be doing if you were their strategic CISO, or if you're their strategic compliance person as a small to mid-sized business over the next couple of years? I want your opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always felt this way. Don't do it because compliance is telling you that if you don't do this, you're going to lose your contract. Do it because you want to protect your own intellectual property.
Yeah.
If the business isn't standing, it doesn't matter if you have a contract or not. That's the first and foremost thing. Working with their service providers, what I do like about what's happening with CMMC is that there's a shared responsibility that's going to be actually written into the contract. So
shared responsibility matrix, right?
Yeah. And so when Dom had brought that up, like as a MSP, if you think that, well, I can no longer just fudge these for you, or you can't even ask me to fudge it for you, or what if the MSP wants to be a whistleblower? The MSP, if they're involved in any way, they themselves have to have that level 2 certification, most likely moving forward. So are they going to be a whistleblower on their own client when they themselves are a level 2? Likely not. Likely that's going to be an advanced MSP and an advanced client where they're doing this together for all the right reasons. Regardless of CMMC, those are mature MSPs and mature OSCs, or organizations seeking certification. Now, you can be a very small business.
That's 2 points.
Thank you. You can be a very small business and be CMMC level 2 certified without it being changing all the functionality of your business. And the trick is going to be which ones are going to be doing it the smart way and find the most cost-effective way to do that. Those are going to be the big winners right out of the gate. So it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds.
Yeah, and if I was asked the same questions of like what would I advise, it would very much be that if you're trying to see and skate where the hockey puck's going to be, it's exactly what Joy just said. The people that skate towards where that puck's going to be start approaching security first compliance as an outcome, right? And start going forward and driving that so that you can meet the reasonable person rule. You can easily prove you're not defrauding the government in your intent and attempts and your work and the things you're doing. But also understand that we're way on the end of the rope of needing to be actually assessed. We're way past the time when this was 2017 and we could just sit there and say, it'll come. I can lie. I don't care. SPRS scoring changed that. Right. Yeah. But we're heading down a path where get ahead of it. Start doing these things, start understanding and attending. And one of the ways you can do that is by taking classes and educating yourself. I would say, and I'll tell everybody here, Joy is the first cybersecurity instructor I ever had. So I have an origin story. I took her class that she made those slides for, and it really sparked my understanding of how much I had in my I don't know bucket. And once you realize
Right.
that, it's almost like Chicken Little, because you really realize, holy hell, Hannah, we've only done 3 of the 17 things I need to be thinking about right now. How am I going to deal with this? I'm 3/17. I'm in trouble. And so I think the
Right.
shift is that go educate yourself. Go take a CCP class if you're dealing with the DIB. Understand what you should be doing so that you can make a decision as an educated business person to say, am I really in the right field? Am I serving the DIB the right way? Or should I change? Should I do something different? So my take on what Joy said is very much.
That part is critical too.
Go ahead.
Is making a decision is do you want to continue to serve the DIB, right? And any other industry around it. You know, Joy mentioned multiple agencies, like Homeland Security is one of them. There's a bunch. I think even DOE has Department of Education has a whole Cooey thing going on, don't they? But
Maybe.
anyways, the point being is you have to make a decision: is do you want to work in this space, right? We desperately need people to work in this space and serve these customers, but it might not be for you. And that's what I tell partners all the time: is that you're getting into an industry that is going to be hard to work in. Could be worth it. Could most certainly be worth it, especially when you factor in that there's going to be much less competition there. But is it worth it for you and the direction you want to take your organization as a business owner? Right? You have to ask yourself that question, like now.
And
I had a conversation
Joy.
yesterday with the MSP that has been working with other MSPs to help them to understand how to mature their own practice within a cybersecurity framework. And he said, I never start them with CMMC. I start them with NIST-CSF, maybe the CIS, maybe parts of 853. But if I try to start them with CMMC, it's such a tall order that they look at that and say, we'll never be able to be that. And so there's, it's going to be interesting because like the firm I work with, Summit 7, we're going to be undergoing our own level 2 certification in the coming months. We're very excited about that. And we only serve clients in the defense industrial base. Like we have a hyper focus on this, which Matt knows I'm thrilled about because I'm so patriotic and I have such a love of the defense industrial base and our warfighter, and I have grandbabies coming, and I'd like them to have a free United States to grow up in.
Preach it.
So for me, it's a mission, it's a calling, and that's what every person I work with at Summit 7 is walking in this same path. We're all facing one direction, and all the clients we work with are facing this direction. And when we're working with MSPs out there that are really struggling, there needs to be an ecosystem where, number one, like Matt said, they get the education they need so they can make an informed decision. Am I going to continue to support the defense industrial base? You see those, there's MSPs out there. There's 2 that I know of that have been publicly called out for selling a 3-day program to become CMMC compliant for like $300.
3 days?
3 days.
You know what, Dom? I'll sell it for half the
What a
price and
deal.
do it for 2 days. I'll do it in 2 days. I'm an undercut.
There you go. We got you.
Yeah. It's nuts, Joy. It's nuts.
But there's, for a long time, I've wanted the MSP industry to regulate itself. We have examples. We have PCI out there where all of the credit card companies did their own self-regulation before they were slapped with some handcuffs by legislators who really don't understand their business model. And this is something that we have to be able to do internally.
I'll double and second and triple and quadruple that, Joy, in the sense that if you take the first part of, the challenge, the other side of the challenge is there's no barrier to entry to be me or you. There's nothing that says Dom knew what he was talking about when he was becoming an MSP. And I think, being a little bit Johnny foreshadowing, I think you're right on something, Joy, that they have to, first off, we have to have some barrier to be us. We have to have some regulation in our industry. And credit cards, same thing with FINRA, same thing with, a lot of the self-regulatory bodies have proven that that's actually the better way to go in a highly changing, highly dense field, because you can have an expert like you make rules that are based on your knowledge of both being a provider as well as also having, the knowledge of what it takes to secure something, right? So I think trying to do that at a legislative level without us doing this as some mid-level self-regulatory is almost impossible, and it's folly. So I love the thought. You and I are on a similar mission, Joy. We both understand and love our current freedom and understand the impact of cybersecurity on everybody else. I would actually just take a second to argue with Dom, which I don't do very often, but I don't know that the decision is yours of whether I want to serve the DIB. I think that's a short-term decision. I think that is a correct and an accurate short-term decision. But if you keep watching the puck as it goes, I think you find that that starts to be now the standard. A lot of the things that we're seeing in CSF and CIS and things like that all flow directly into the same practices and evidence that come into CMMC. So you could start seeing a type of program like CMMC being a much more auditable and spreadable framework into different verticals like banking and anything else that serves some of these tangential critical infrastructures. So if you say, I'm not going to deal with it, I'm going to stay back with my old practices. I'm not going to learn how to be more compliant and defensible. I'm not going to build along a framework. I'm not going to. Fine. At some point, you probably won't be able to meet the standards necessary that Joy and I speak about when it comes to self-regulation and some level of medium standard. So
I totally agree that industry is going to wash out, right? But I think if I'm going to decide whether or not I'm going to serve this industry in particular, I think part of it is right now, do I want to go through CMMC level 2? Do I perhaps want to have to think about
True story.
I do genuinely hope that changes.
I do too.
And it probably will. I think hopefully they get enough comments. If you're in the space, go and make public comments. But anyways, I think you have to make a decision on, do you want to be in an industry that's the risk, right? To Joy's point, I also enjoy my freedom, right? Do I want to have that on me? I don't.
You mean that personal handcuff freedom is what you meant?
I do. I do. Yeah. And I don't want to be in that space for me personally, right? I don't think it's something I would want to be into simply because of the stakes that I'm sort of taking on, right? And if you think about self-regulating MSPs, we're far more dangerous than your CPA, right? CPA screws up, you're going to slap on the wrist from the IRS and a fine. We screw up and your company disappears, right? And all the data and everything that you've built, and all the livelihoods of everyone that works for you, right? So
I would argue, though, that's why CMMC level 2 is important for every MSP that is trying to protect the defense industrial base. It's do as I say, not as I do. And we can't have that anymore. I do think in the short term, it's not realistic. I think that maybe self-attestation and then working toward a formal certification process for the MSPs makes a lot more sense. But I don't think that having somebody... Here's the other thing. Any MSP out there that says, I don't think I want to play in this space because the commitment is too big. Tell me at what point deploying a normal laptop, desktop, configuring a firewall, any of the basic IT, patching, vulnerabilities, any of the basic IT services is not cybersecurity.
Oh, you mean Control 7? You also mean Control... Yeah, exactly. They're non-linear or non-delineable. You can't separate them out. I agree with you, Joy, like 1,000%. I have the same conversation around lots of things. People think security is only my antivirus, or security is... No, security is all of the things to defend oneself, to protect oneself for the CIA triad. I had a brilliant woman teach me that many, many moons ago, right? And so security is all of those pieces. Yeah. I got Joy laughing. That was great. Thank you. That makes me very happy.
That does remind me, though, and for those who aren't aware, the CUI program is based on the confidentiality of data, and it is not... 800.171 is a tailored set of controls out of NIST 853, where they took that verbose control catalog of 1,300 controls and said, all right, which ones would apply to data confidentiality only? Because that's what the DoD is concerned about. They're sick and tired of China and other countries getting a hold of technical data and being able to replicate what our own weapon systems are using and need throughout our supply chain. So availability and integrity are not two of the pillars brought into NIST 800.171. So in that sense, it might be simpler than a more robust cybersecurity framework that is based on confidentiality. But does that mean that you shouldn't have backups of your data for availability? No. There's just common
No.
sense. Let's back it up with good
Yeah,
cyber hygiene.
yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I love
But
it.
I think a lot of times
Well,
in
Joy,
compliance, it's regulation trying to address a specific problem, right? If we go back to the
Yeah.
OPM breach, I'm just now getting little postcards that are like, "Hey, you were part of the OPM breach. You want some money?" The lawyer cards. But because I was in that, and I got all the letters and the garbage, and everyone I ever knew because of the clearance investigations also got those letters. But anyways, if you look at the OPM breach, it's a major breach of confidentiality. It's a major failure. They don't want that, right? And I think if you get to a point where you focus so hard on 171 that you do ignore INA, there are other things that will come and slap you about that, right? If you lose the
Yep.
technical specifications of your product and it was a part of a government contract, doesn't mean there's no teeth or punishment behind you doing that. I think it's a really, really good that you brought up. This is for confidentiality, and you should still look at another framework to bring in and pair it, right? CIS would be my choice, but go shopping and then add 171 on top of that, right? But
Yep, 100%.
it's just it's wild, and again, I'm really happy to see this coming. I really am. It's so long overdue.
And one thing also, I don't know which partner you were working with, but I know of a few that do that. And when you talk about they never bring them straight into CMMC, but instead bring them into a sub framework of CIS or NIST CSF or one of those two, I think the reason is it's like when I played football, I didn't just jump right in and play defensive guard, left tackle or guard or nose guard, right? There was certain degrees of you have to run first. You're going to have to learn how to hit. You've got to learn how to tackle. You've got to learn how to do. And I think one of the nice things about these pragmatic and very prescriptive frameworks like CIS or like NIST CSF is that it teaches you how to use the right muscles. Right. And it teaches you how to use the right muscles to do the stuff, to document the stuff, to be able to prove evidence, to be able to think about how you design it. And then when you step into the integrity or the confidentiality aspect of it and the focus very heavily on Cooey, you have those muscles. And so I think it's just about leading people through building those muscles, just like anything else you ever do, so that you can then flex them all in unison to accomplish some goal. Right. And so that's, I think, the reason you start with those type of frameworks.
Any starting framework is going to include the people, the process, and the technology within the organization. So everyone comes
100%.
together for the first time. It's no longer the IT department running down the hallway going, please don't click on that.
Yeah, exactly, Joy. Well, I've been excited as all get out. This is a bit of an awesome moment for me getting to, present with you who really started me down my cybersecurity journey so many years ago. And so I just wanted to take a moment to say a very special and personal thank you. Joy, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't sit through those 6 hours with you over those 2 days and just feel like I was such a child yet again in learning security. And so it was so valuable for me. And I just want to say thanks.
Matt,
Tom, if you want to say anything.
All you guys are doing.
Thank you so much. You've born a monster, so unfortunately, but
I really appreciate
Dom,
you
if you want
coming.
to get us to any closing thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. And the information you shared is extremely valuable. So, save this video, scrub it back, repeat this information to yourself because it's all extremely
Connect
valuable.
with Joy on LinkedIn.
Connect
we'll
with Joy on
in the
LinkedIn.
Comments below.
Yeah.
Yep.
I hope
on LinkedIn.
And we also have links. Yeah, go.
I just want to put this out there that I'm going to be working with the National Society of IT Service Providers, with the certified third-party assessment organizations or C3PAOs, with any MSP organization I can get my hands on, so that we can have a voice in shaping the CMMC assessment process. If it's something you're interested in at all, please watch for it, because we'll be issuing a position paper that we'd like you to be able to take some of the high-level takeaways that especially affect MSPs and have a voice, send those in to the CMMC accreditation body so that your voice can be heard. Please watch for those.
We'll get it on the
Love
show
that.
for you, Joy. When we do
we'll
next
put a
show,
link.
if you have that document, we'll get it and we'll highlight it in the show, and we'll also get it on there. If you guys also don't mind, thank you for joining us so much. This has been awesome. We're going to make a little bit of change down in the chat or below on this. You'll see the actual links to the articles we've had, any links to ancillary things like Joy's profile, things like that. But also, please, please, please like and subscribe. I'd really like to make 400. They told me I have to stay on air the rest of the day till we get our 400th subscriber. And I'm already tired, y'all. So let's get this thing wrapped up. Please like and subscribe. I love y'all, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.